Thanks to Fun Labs for sponsoring today's video. If you're someone like me who plays a NintendoSwitch rather regularly, the standard pack-in Joy-Cons aren't always the most comfortable and reliable controller options, even when disregarding the dreaded drift. This is where Fun Labs comes in with their joypad and charging grip. Since 2017, Fun Labs have made it their priority to create vibrant controllers that add so much personality and style to your system and gaming experience. I can wholeheartedly say that these accessories hold true to their intentions, as the joypads feel great to use both docked and undocked, with a good grip and matte texture that feel wonderful on my hands. Not to mention the buttons have an excellent weight and feedback to them, making playing in handheld mode feel very natural. They even went so far as to include additional shoulder buttons and turbo buttons to boot, so you've got all the bases covered. Even when transitioning to a more dedicated controller, everything just feels right, while still being compact and streamlined. And I must say, the design of these bad boys have so much character, they add tons of flair to the system, especially in handheld mode. This is further complemented by ushering up to 7 types of LED lights, part of Fun Labs' special hidden till lit technology that broadcast a wide variety of such vibrant neon colors that can be adjusted to suit whichever preference you desire, even down to how the lights are projected from the controller. I personally go with the neon blue, it just feels right. The accompanying charging grip ensures that you'll be able to play for hours on end, and it too lights up the room like nobody else. And just look at this thing, it's so cool and reminds me of a retro controller in design, but with a more contemporary button layout, the best of both worlds as they say. I'm so happy to be able to play my Nintendo Switch with these joypads, and once again a huge thank you to Fun Labs for sponsoring today's video and for making these fantastic accessories. I don't know how I lived without them for so long. If you are interested in giving these a go, please follow the link in the description and use the discount code BlazingKnight to get 15% off your first purchase, and be sure to follow Fun Labs on their various social media platforms, also linked below, to remain up to date with their new products and announcements. And now, back to our regularly scheduled entertainment.
Last time!
In fact, it's reasonable to envision a Zora with a similar, if not identical team, but that's a video for another day. No time like the present! Indeed, a while back I made a video theory crafting what teams of Pokemon various villains from the Fire Emblem series would utilize, and many of you expressed interest in the possibility of the protagonists getting their own assortment of pocket monsters. Well, now's a better time than ever to deliver the goods, as I go about constructing Pokemon teams for our beloved Fire Emblem heroes. As a quick refresher, I'll be assigning teams of 6 Pokemon to a selection of characters within the Fire Emblem universe, with my choices primarily being based around how said companions complement a character's theme, class, weapon, or personality. On that note, I don't care about natures and movesets, you can headcanon whatever you want. And unlike last time where each villain had a signature Pokemon exclusive to them, I instead decided to assign each hero with an ace Pokemon, essentially acting as their primary cohort. And my reason for doing this is, well, there's a lot of heroes to get through. At first, I was going to stick to the rule of only including 5 heroes from each Fire Emblem universe, but I quickly discovered that doing so would cause me to skip otherwise essential entities. Therefore, I shall instead select 5 characters per game. Though trust me, even that's going to be a rather lucrative rule, as you'll see later. So be prepared for a lot of repeats, but hey, shit happens. Also, potential spoiler warning for the whole series, and I'm not including either Tokyo Mirage Sessions or the original Fire Emblem Warriors. But before we begin, more than 50% of you watching aren't subscribed, so I'd very much appreciate it if you click that like and subscribe button, and also follow me on both Twitch and Patreon. Formalities dictate that we begin with the very first Fire Emblem and its remake on the DS. And so, with Marth being the original Hero King and franchise mascot, I felt that his Pokemon should all be from Generation 1 and comprise of arguably the most recognizable monsters. In this case, the final forms of the 3 starters, Raichu. Yes, Pikachu is more iconic, but I have and always will prefer Raichu. Rhydon, since it was the first Pokemon ever designed, and finally his ace Mew, for in lore terms, its DNA is the basis for all Pokemon, a nice parallel to the majority of protagonists in this universe having blue hair. Every king needs a queen, and Marth's is the lovely Princess Shida, the original Pegasus Knight, and over 30 years later her foundations have made for some of the best units and loveliest ladies, something I am very grateful for.
Oh, thank you!
Naturally, she'd be prone to focusing on a team of flying types, though I protest that those of a more elegant nature would become a woman of her stature, consisting of Togekiss, Altaria, Pavilion, Oricorio, Swanna, and her ace, Lugia. Anyone who's familiar with Fire Emblem understands the importance of dragons, with the sleepyhead Tiki setting the groundwork for each game to follow, whose team would unsurprisingly be dragon-based. But I lean towards those of a more magical and or softer nature, that being Dragonite, Gudra, Tatsugiri, Mega Ampharos, Drampa because it reminds her of Bantu, and her ace, Regidrago, for it's an incomplete Regi and she too won't be fully grown until Awakening, where she gets some serious Jigglypuffs. Marth would not have gotten far without his trusted retainer Jagan, one of the strongest knights in Arcanea despite his age, and fittingly so, Fossil Pokemon is what I shall base his team around, comprised of Omastar, Armaldo, Caracosta, Rampardos, Greydilly, and his ace, Aerodactyl. Because Kanto! Rounding out Fire Emblem's origins is the leader of the White Wings, Lady Minerva, an enemy Wyvern rider turned ally who cemented the law that Wyverns be some of the best units in every subsequent title they appear in, who I assume to likely specialize in flying and or dragon type Pokemon, and so her team will be that of Haxorus, Noivern, Hydreigon, Garchomp, and Druddigon, plus her ace, Salamence, who can become a mega version when Hutterclair isn't enough to get the job done. Shadow Dragon wasn't the end for the citizens of Arcanea, as Mystery of the Emblem and its remake on the DS detail what happened after Marth saved the land and defeated Garneth. Long story short, basically the exact same shit. Despite treading familiar territory, there were some new faces to aid in Marth's quest, one of which was exclusive to the remake, the Avatar Chris, which was the first time the series allowed players to create and do battle with a unit of their design, being a loyal and brave yet humble retainer, and I feel their Pokemon would follow suit with Stoutland, Braviary, Lycanroc, Emboar, Lucario, and their ace, Arcanine. Chris wasn't the only combatant the remake added to the roster, for Lady Katarina, while turning traitor for a portion of the game, did eventually come back to the light, and I suspect to fittingly use Pokemon that represent light and dark aspects of her life, plus the role she played as a spy/imposter, those being Mimikyu, Solrock, Lunatone, Espeon, Umbreon, with her ace being Morpeko, and suddenly the image of Marnie and Katarina doing an outfit swap is something I cannot live without. Returning to fight by the king's side are the Pegasus sisters Palla, Catria, and Est, though given the context, only Palla was needed because Silverlance go brr. Nevertheless, this trio I discern to reasonably engage the enemy in a triple battle format, and thus deploy a team of Dodrio, Noctowl, and Swallow, with their aces being Zapdos, Articuno, and Moltres, the first legendary trio who just so happen to be flying types. Insert poetry joke here. Returning from Shadow Dragon, but now as an ally, is the Knight Sirius, originally posing as the enemy commander Kamu, but went through a bit of an identity crisis before coming back to his senses, though at no point did he forget his code of honor and chivalry, and thus I suspect Pokemon of a knightly theme to accompany him, those being Sirfetch'd, Gallade, Corviknight, Bisharp, Phalanx, and his ace, Excavalier. And to bookend Book 2, we have the spellcaster Lyn, who returns to deliver the Fire Emblem itself to the Hero King, and being a woman of magic, I'd maintain for her to favour Pokemon of a similar disposition, such as Mismagius, Chimecho, Mr. Mime, Frostlass, Meowstic, and her ace, Hatterene. Speaking of which, can we get some sort of Heroes alt where Lyn wears a hat? You'll be surprised how many people will pay money for something so trivial.
She's just a regular Malibu Stacy with a stupid cheap hat! She still embodies all the awful stereotypes she did before!
But she's got a new hat.
In between both Arcanea entries, Fire Emblem took a quick detour to the land of Valentia with Fire Emblem Gaiden and its remake on the 3DS, Shadows of Valentia. This fable chronicled the deeds of Alm and Celica, the former of which was raised as a young farm lad and later learnt that he's actually royalty. And so, Pokemon who are of the slow burner type, I deliberate to thematically match his personal journey, that being Blissey, Goddesspod, Hitmontop, Yanmega, Vikavolt, and his ace, Gyarados. While Alm was busy fighting a revolution, Celica embarked on her own spiritual journey to rid the land of the Great Plague, and lose a number of brain cells in the process. And given her aptitude for magic, specifically fire spells, Pokemon that perpetuate the latter element would likely hold her favour, consisting of Ninetales, Chandelure, Pyroar, Magmortar, and her ace, Delphox, with a Flareon thrown in for good measure. Ladies love Eevee and its evolutions. That is a fact of life. Before Arm and his merry band set out for adventure, Lucas ended up recruiting these squires for the upcoming revolution, and was consistently shown to be a stout and humble young man who doesn't fear the gods, and I pondered that his Pokemon would more than likely be very strong, but not on the surface, comprised of Shaman, Snorlax, Tangrowth, Swampert, Vanillux, and his ace, Slacking, cause what does it matter if you can only move every 2 turns when your enemies die in 1? Over on Celica's side, the mercenary Saber helps the naive young lass cross the seas on her excursion, and despite his aptitude for swordplay, he's very chill with cheekbones that could seriously cut glass. Therefore, laid-back Pokemon, or those who are associated with blades, I wager to be his ideal shipmate, like Scizor, Kabutops, Gallade, Excadrill, Ceruledge, and his ace, Sceptile. Come on, we've all seen the anime and know that Trico is always just vibing. Both Arm and Celica are connected in a very spiritual sense, with Myson being responsible for looking out for them both, rescuing Celica from scumbags and teaching Arm how to handle a sword. The man pertains much life experience, and so I believe Pokemon who are similarly robust would fit right alongside him, those being Relicanth, Bastiodon, Cloyster, Mamoswine, Gigalith, and his ace, Regirock. When making the jump to the Super Famicom, Fire Emblem embarked for the land of Udril with Genealogy of the Holy War, an epic tale spanning 2 generations with Sigurd leading the initial charge, whose Pokemon I determined to embody courage and leadership. Therefore, Braviary, Arcanine, Gardevoir, because it reminds him of his wife, Pyroar, and Charizard would make up his team, with Cobalion being his ace Pokemon, since it's a sword of justice and Sigurd has a literal sword of justice. Sigurd's brother-in-law and the then Prince of Thracia Quan would follow his lordship to the very end, literally in this case, and personifies many of the same heroic traits, thus leading to the likelihood of using Pokemon who are both courageous and powerful, like Blastoise, Rhyperior, Aggron, Milotic, again, wife, Nidoking, and finally Terrakion, who's also a sword of justice and hits just as hard as Gaybolg. Well, at least we know what Eflin sees in him. The sons of both these lords play pivotal roles in the future that is to come, but neither would exist without their respective mothers, and Lady Deirdre is a woman of great mysticism and beauty, who would likely gravitate towards mystical Pokemon along the lines of Pheromosa, Magearna, Reuniclus, Sigilith, Manaphy, and Deoxys. Admittedly, that seems really overpowered, but at least Manfroy will think twice about trying to kidnap this maiden now she has Deoxys attacked by her side. The mother of Leaf, Eflin, supports both her brother and husband no matter the circumstances, and went so far as to protect her daughter Altina on her deathbed. The term maternal is how I would best describe this Duchess, and so motherly Pokemon I deem to complement her station, being comprised of Nidoqueen, Blissey, Lapras, Miltank, and her ace, Kangaskhan, or more accurately the Mega version. Also, I'll throw in a Jolteon for good measure. If you're watching Abyss Walker, you're welcome. Finally, we have one of the few characters who survives Arvis's massacre, kind of, and wielder of the Forseti tome, Lewin. A man who shrank from his duties, and oh gosh did he ever pay the price for doing so. How's Anan doing, by the way? Despite his lax attitude, the man's affinity for wind magic is apparent, and thus Pokemon associated with said element I believe to best suit his ensemble, those being Xatu, Noctowl, Honchkrow, Mandibuzz, Tropius, and his ace, Tornadus. Once Sigurd and his entourage spend too much time in the sun, the second generation of warriors step up to finish the fight, with Sigurd's son Seliph leading the way while carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, whom I perceive to use Pokemon that reflect both his mother and father, being focused on leadership with an aura of mysticism surrounding them, such as Cosmoem, Celesteela, Kartana, Calyrex, Rotom, and his ace, Keldeo, as if Smash fans needed even more of a reason to hate Fire Emblem. While Seliph was Sigurd's only child, Deirdre did produce additional offspring. It's a long and messed up story, with her only daughter Julia electing to fight against her brother Julius, because the blood of Naga can solve just as many problems as it creates. And so I ponder that in order to honor her inheritance, she would command mystical Pokemon spliced in with dragon types, using a team of Guzzlord, Naganadel, Nihilego, Dragapult, Mega Altaria, and her ace, Ultra Necrozma. Suddenly, the Book of Naga feels all the more redundant.
Can you say redundant?
As is tradition, an enemy later becomes an ally to aid Seliph, going by the name of Ares, the son of Eldegan, who, as his title suggests, would use Pokemon of a knightly nature, though more so Dark Knight if you will. Therefore, Skarmory, Mightyena, Gallade, Escavalier, Berserker, and his ace Bisharp shall help him exact justice, very much following in his father's footsteps, though thankfully not in regards to his relationships with relatives.
Oni-chan!
Y'all really aren't ready for a genealogy remake. Yet another enemy turned friend, Altina of Thracia, after learning of her real parents' fate, joined Seliph to give Travant a taste of his own medicine, using what I advocate to be a mix of dragon and flying type Pokemon, with her selection boasting Salamence, Altaria, Flygon, Aerodactyl, Glysaur, and her ace, Noivern, and I'm sure her parents would be proud to witness Travant being ripped to pieces, for Karma is indeed a bitch. Finally, we have the young lad who would carry out Sigurd's wishes and train the second generation of warriors, Oifei, acting as the mentor/paladin of the group and center of controversy within the fandom as to whether or not Jaegers and Oifeis are two separate archetypes. Spoilers, the answer is no! And seeing as he's heavily tied to the second half of the game, I figured he would amass Pokemon that are part of the Johto region and are known for their wisdom, in particular Oranguru, Xatu, Honchkrow, Jellicent, Sirfetch'd, and his ace, Slowking. During the downtime between Sigurd's death and Seliph's uprising, the next entry in the Fire Emblem series, Thracia 776, sees the son of Quan and Eflin Leaf fight to free Munster and eventually the entire kingdom. Much like his cousin, I feel this young squire would honour his parents' legacy by deploying teams of soft but powerful creatures, in this case Meganium, Vaporeon, Walrein, Gogoat, Aurorus, and his ace Virizion, the final sword of justice. Yet another member of Sigurd's army who didn't bite the dust, Finn was trained by Quan himself and acts as Leaf's retainer, being loyal to a fault and I believe to bear Pokemon with similarly steadfast convictions like Arcanine, Primarina, Stoutland, Mightyena, Swellow, and his ace, Lycanroc. It's a good thing Quan's training paid off because Finn wields that Brave Lance like a pro and put it to good use with Lachesis, something Eflin picked up on very quickly. Speaking of Lachesis, her daughter Nana helps Leaf during his quest and even partakes in Seliph's rebellion. And given that much of her arc involves becoming headstrong after living such a sheltered life, I theorized that a contextually appropriate choice of Pokemon would begin weak but become much stronger by their final evolution, consisting of a Alolan Raichu, Milotic, Jumpluff, Vileplume, Blissey, and her ace, Azumarill. Thanks to Heroes, Reinhardt stands as one of the most iconic characters from Thracia. However, his sister Olwen, despite aligning herself with the opposition, thinks very highly of her brother, and follows his philosophy when it comes to the ways of magic, which I deliberate to result in a team of electric Pokemon, specifically those who function as proverbial glass cannons, comprised of Jolteon, Electrode, Substriker, Heliolisk, Emolga, and Mega Manectric as her ace. Finally, we have another combatant who shot up the popularity poll thanks to Heroes, for Marita had to fight her own war after being possessed by the cursed Shadow Sword, and so I presume Pokemon that embody the themes of curses and possession would ensure victory for the swashbuckler, those being Golurk, Cofagrigus, Delmise, Ceruledge, Trevenant, and her ace, Aegislash, though I'd wager for her to primarily use its blade form, because when you're a swordmaster, what even is defense? Heading from home console to handheld, a new era of Fire Emblem emerged as the series debuted on the Game Boy Advance with Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Taking place in the continent of Elib, the game follows Roy's journey to defeat the King of Burn Zephyl, and since he's referred to as the Young Lion, it stands to reason that he would train lion-based Pokemon or those who are fire types given his weapon of choice. Thus Entei, Pyroar, Arcanine, Infernape, Flareon, and his ace Solgaleo would be his trusted companions. God knows they'd be more useful in the later maps than the boy himself. Roy wouldn't be able to defeat Burn without the aid of his childhood sweetheart Lalina, the daughter of Hector, and despite being the cutest little lady, she's a force of nature, and one I perceive to be proficient with magical-based fire-type Pokemon, much like Celica, particularly Ninetales, Delphox, Chandelure, Magmortar, and Castform, with her ace being Heatran, since it's big, bulky, and armoured, much like her dear father. While the dragons were primarily enemies, Roy also made allies with these creatures, both pure and half-bloods, with Sophia being the latter, and was a bitch to use given her lack of, well, everything. Nevertheless, being a half-dragon and shaman, I proposed that she would manifest a team of Pokemon who are either associated with the dark arts or straight-up dragon types. Thus, she'll have Hydreigon, Goodra, Mismagius, Gothitelle, and Espeon, with her ace being Dragapult, since Ghost Dragon suits her overall vibe, and Giratina is a bit too much for this paperweight to handle. Both Roy and Lilina were prepared to face Burn thanks to the efforts of their teacher Cecilia, one of the 3 generals of Echuria, and even stood up to Zephyr at one point. It didn't end well. Her occupation leads me to believe she'll have an affinity for magical and or psychic types, so Gardevoir, Hatterene, Starmie, Girafarig, and Alakazam would comprise her team, with Galarian Rapidash as her ace. Finally, there's one more occupant who has the largest personal stake in this entire war, Zephyr's sister Guinevere. Blazing Swords shines more light on the two's history, but her story is extremely tragic given how their relationship began, and due to the circumstances plus my headcanon that Zephyr would use primarily dragon Pokemon, her choice of allies would be specifically designed to counter an assortment of dragon types. Therefore, Regice, Aurorus, Sylveon, Mawile, and Mega Altaria would be the ideal picks, along with her ace Alolan Ninetales. After all, she was gifted a fox by her brother, and therefore this creature would hold a lot of sentimental value. Insert poetry jug once again. The next entry in the GBA trilogy set the clock back 20 years with Fire Emblem the Blazing Sword, telling the tale of Eliwood, Hector and Lyn, and sowing the seeds that would eventually result in the war against Burn. Turns out Sophie's dad was a cunt. Since this was the first Fire Emblem game in the West, the devs had the player tackle a tutorial mode in order to learn the ropes, made possible thanks to Lady Lindis, as we initially experience her personal story and further contributions to the overarching narrative, what little they are. Given that she was raised on the plains, I suspect her ladyship to resonate with wildlife Pokemon, and those who are a homage to archery. And so I believe Fearow, Rapidash, Tauros, Leafeon, and Tropius, plus her ace Decidueye, would make for excellent companions. The second of our 3 heroes and father of Roy is Lord Eliwood, arguably the main character of this escapade and one that I feel doesn't get enough love, for he exemplifies many wonderful traits, in particular his bravery and kindness, and so Pokemon who are similarly soft yet bold would be a perfect fit for the Marquess, and thus Lapras, Ampharos, Togekiss, Serperior, Altaria, and his ace Primarina would be my picks for his team. And in the case of Primarina, not only does it give off Ninian vibes, but you may have noticed that his ace and Lyn's have something in common. Finally, there's the axe-wielding brute Hector, whose brash arrogance and temper, while certainly frightful, is offset by his undying fidelity and magnificent resolve that makes the friendship between his fellow companions some of the best chemistry this series has ever seen, and I have no doubt his Pokepals would be just as daunting and steadfast, bearing forth Haxorus, Feraligatr, Aggron, Hippowdon, Excadrill, and his ace Incineroar, and suddenly everything makes sense, though only one of these are playable in Smash, much to Lyn's dismay. Much of Blazing Sword's plot involves keeping the siblings Ninian and Nils safe from Nagal, as the two of them have travelled all over Alive to evade this monster, who wishes to use their power to summon the dragons, given that both of them are, well, dragons. Since they're so close and share power between one another, I believe they would function as double battle trainers, and focus on primarily dragon-type Pokemon, in this case Aurorus and Tyrantrum, Dracozolt and Dracovic, and finally Latias and Lotias as their aces, given their legendary status and being used as a means of travel in the Hoenn remakes. Poetry! Rounding out the Alive era is the little bundle of joy Nino, who had her own little side story and made for some of the best writing in the game, as well as being that one unit just about everyone trains to the max, because how could you say no to this little baby?
Yay!
Nino is notable for her growth potential, and so Pokemon who are really cute but also pretty strong, I could easily picture suiting this lass, with the choices being Pachirisu, Glaceon, Diancie, Klefki, Cincino, and Victini as her ace, and given the breadth of its firepower, I'll gladly watch it burn Sonya to a crisp. Before making the jump to 3D, the GBA was blessed with one more Fire Emblem game titled Sacred Stones, which sees the twins Erica and Ephraim separated as the result of war and must fight to save their world and become a family once again, with Ephraim doing all the heavy lifting since Erica lacks any semblance of a strength stat. Speaking of which, Her Highness, while somewhat naive, becomes far more steadfast by Journey's End, and an ideal queen of Rhinus. Therefore, Pokemon that give off similar queen energy, I predict to comprise her lineup. And so Lapras, Dragonair, Gardevoir, Vespiquen, Aurorus and Nidoqueen as her ace shall fight in her stead since Erica's damage is worth jack and shit. On the other side of the coin, we have Prince Ephraim, who was practically born for battle and yearns to fight once he becomes king, because apparently he's not brave enough for politics. And running parallel to him would be Pokemon that hold the same grandiose standing, and so Gallade, Kingdra, Salamence, Rhyperior, and King Gambit shall form his battalion, with Nidoking as his ace. A factor I find to be unique about Sacred Stones is that dragons are heavily underplayed within this universe, though the young Monarchite Myrrh is imperative to Ephraim's tale, and given the situation surrounding her father, a team consisting of dragon and poison types I consider to be the most thematically appropriate, specifically Dragalge, Toxapex, Drapion, Dragonite, Goodra, and her ace Naganadel. And if she's feeling particularly sentimental, she might just nickname it Daddy. The continent of Magvel is comprised of many nations, and the Princess of Ralston La Rochelle is... how would one go about describing her?
That's a good question.
This holy woman is an enigma wrapped within a mystery. With such a vivid and delusional imagination, I'm convinced that her brain is the highest form of narcotic, and so Pokemon befitting of this, I believe would specialize in or are synonymous with the move Metronome, in this case Togekiss, Snorlax, Gengar, Sableye, Grimmsnarl, and of course she'd have Clefable as her ace. Finally, despite the siblings being the ones to liberate their homeland from Grado, Her Highness would not have gotten far without Seth, a unit so good and well-rounded he could practically beat this game in his sleep. Therefore, Pokemon who display a relatively equal stat distribution across the board would complement his build, in this case Galele, Charcadet, Golduck, Medicham, Silvally, and his ace Calyrex will help make his journey through Sacred Stones even easier, which I thought to be an impossibility. Fire Emblem swiftly made the jump to the GameCube and into the third dimension with Path of Radiance, a title that marked a bold new chapter for the franchise as the hero Ike was not a lord or had any sort of special bloodline. He was a mere mercenary whose courage and resolve shook the world of Tellius and demonstrated that what was thought to be impossible was merely a suggestion. Does this mean we can get a new Golden Sun?
No.
Oh. It stands to reason that Ike would carry with him a team of Pokemon that perpetuate his bravery, so Arcanine, Zangoose, Luxray, Lucario, and Chestnut shall be his exclusive mercenary squad, with Braviary as his ace. Ike is a born fighter, and so he leaves the finer details of management to his friend Soren, a highly capable yet testy strategist whom I picture to carefully select a team of Pokemon that congregate a dark yet tactical thematic, and so Absol, Weavile, Hydreigon, Grimmsnarl, Spiritomb, and his ace Honchkrow would be to his liking, though I use that term loosely as I'm convinced everything makes Soren miserable.
Guess I had it coming.
Are you happy? I've never been happy.
Despite lacking a noble title, Ike was fortunate enough to have the paladin Titania accompany him from his humble beginnings to the final battle against Ashira, acting as the mother of the group who's equal parts deadly as she is beautiful. So I just use Pokemon that are just as dangerous yet divine to fit like a glove, with her choices being Milotic, Gardevoir, Primarina, Sylveon, Lopunny, and her ace Mega Altaria. It's good to know no matter the circumstances, Jagans will always be there to help the protagonist. But I thought she was an Ifei! Shut up! Unique to the world of Tellius were the Lagoos, creatures that could transform into ferocious animals and packed one hell of a punch unless your name was Lyre. Of these fascinating creatures, Ranulf played a big part in both games and was one of Ike's best buddies, being a literal cool cat, and while this is a rather obvious choice, I picture the Lion King's vassal to gravitate towards a team of feline friends. with his picks being Zangoose, Eevee, Berserker, Pyroar, Liepard, and his ace Meowscarada. Finally, while not necessarily a primary character, Jill Fizzard holds a special place in players' hearts for having one of the best arcs in the series and embodying many thematic elements Fire Emblem is known for. Plus, she's a Wyvern Rider and they're always cool. Due to her profession and upbringing within the frosty region of Talrega, Jill I'd imagine to select a team of Dragon and Ice Pokemon. Therefore, Avalugg, Mamoswine, Drodogun, Haxorus, Abomasnow, and her ace Baxcalibur would be the most appropriate choices. Jumping ahead 3 years and shifting to the Nintendo Wii, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn concludes the Telia saga and shows how characters have changed and evolved within the 3-year time skip, or in the case of Astrid regressed so hard, I like to pretend she doesn't exist. New to the ensemble was the silver-haired maiden Micaiah, a beacon of hope that led Day into victory over Benyon, and her magical proficiency would reasonably suggest that Pokemon of a similar aura would gravitate towards this miracle worker, with a selection of Jirachi, Espeon, Frostlass, Hatterene, and Blissey making up her team, plus Mega Gardevoir as her ace. Micaiah would not have been able to liberate Dayan alone given that she snaps like a twig under the pressure of a well-aimed fart. Therefore, the stowaway turned retainer Soph stays by Micaiah's side till death do them part, or she's had enough of listening to him simp over Ike. Since he's a rogue by profession, I believe the most logical course of action is for him to choose similarly roguish Pokemon and those with a protective personality, with Umbreon, Thievul, Greninja, Crocodile, and Obstagoon being the ideal choices, plus Mega Gallade as his ace, and a wonderful match for Micaiah and her Gardevoir. You know the drill. Over in Crimea, Alintia spent the last 3 years rebuilding her country and dealing with her own civil war that acts as some of the best writing this series has done in 5 chapters no less. Makes you wonder how they fucked these games up. She also spent that time getting jacked given her numbers, and so flying types of a regal nature would be most sufficient of her highness, consisting of Altaria, Talonflame, Vespiquen, Mega Pidgeot, Corviknight, and her ace Galarian Articuno. Switching gears to the land of Benyon, the Empress Saniki had her own little arc that cemented her status as Empress despite the technicalities saying otherwise. Objection! Her aptitude for fire magic is paramount, and therefore I believe her to favour fire types of a more mystical disposition, preferably Castform, Delphox, Victini, Ninetales, Ho-Ho, and her ace Volcarona. Admittedly, this does feel like a rather overpowered team, but in hindsight, it balances out the fact that using Saniki and Radiant Dawn sucks! And to cap off our Telia summary, we have the trio of siblings Rayson, Leanne, and Raphael, Heron royalty who are responsible for bringing peace and stability while simultaneously acting as the dancers of the game. Alright, get it out your system. These angels have the ability to peer into the hearts of other beings and resonate with their feelings. Thus, not only do I perceive them to function as a triple battle team, but they would additionally deploy trios of legendary Pokemon, specifically Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini, with Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf as their respective aces, since they're known as the Emotion Trio. Since the DS entries have already been addressed, let us make haste for the 3DS with the saviour of the franchise, Fire Emblem Awakening. Set centuries after Shadow Dragon, the newest descendant of Masked Bloodline Chrom is called upon to protect the land from a multitude of threats, including Nintendo pulling the plug on their funding. Thankfully, he was able to succeed on all fronts, and though he is of noble birth, that sort of lifestyle doesn't suit this shepherd, and so he exuberates an air of humbleness and leadership that I envision would extend to his choice of Pokemon, those being Electivire, Heracross, Breloom, Emboar, Golurk, and his ace, Palkia. I know that seems out of place, but it'll make sense in a minute. None of Chrom's feats would have come to fruition had his daughter Lucina not travelled to the past and intervened in key moments of Chrom's life that would have led to an otherwise grimmer future. Since she defied the laws of time, Pokemon that are capable of similar feats would make for her best buddies on this journey to challenge fate, and so Rotom, Boltoy, Celebi, Xatu, and Espeon would help her create a bright future, with her ace Dialga being at the centre of it all, and suddenly Chrom having a Palkia makes a lot more sense. Both Chrom and Lucina's destinies were heavily tied to the tactician Robin, for in one timeline they are a key instrument in Chrom's victories, while an alternate universe reveals them to be the fell dragon Grima and brings about ruin to Lucina's world. Given their roles within each timeline, a team of Pokemon that occupy the themes of magic, darkness, and dragons, I conceived to tip the scales in their favor, consisting of Dragapult, Hydreigon, Honchkrow, Absol, Morpeko, and their ace Giratina, which if Robin happens to be Lucina's mother and Chrom's wife, makes their selection of specialists all the more symbolically resonant. Translation?
Poetry.
Chrom wasn't the only descendant of Moth to be present in the present, as his sister Lissa helped to keep her friends and allies patched up and gave birth to possibly the biggest meme lord in the franchise, which is no easy feat, mind you. Lissa may be a sweet little lady, but she's far from tiny and delicate, therefore Pokemon that look cute but pack one hell of a punch would cement her self-image, those being Tinkaton, Pachirisu, Hawlucha, Sylveon, Shaman, and her ace Mega Marwile. And thanks to this steel fairy type, suddenly the Falchion is the least of Grima's problems. Alas, our time of awakening must come to an end, and we shall have Sayori send us off, for she was instrumental in the war against Woolheart and acted as an unintentional preview of the franchise's next entry. Due to being heavily inspired by ancient Japanese culture and the way of the samurai, it stands to reason that Pokemon who have comparable cultural significance would make for excellent brothers in arms, such as King Gambit, Shiftry, Greninja, Lurantis, Aselgor, and her ace Samurott shall fight by her side till the bitter end. Or until Chapter 21 where the game forgets she exists. After Awakening generated a hefty profit, Nintendo went big for the next entry, Fire Emblem Fates, which was split up into 3 games, and as such, I'll be covering 5 characters from each one, which yes is somewhat long-winded, but trust me, the worst is yet to come. Fates is built on the foundation of choosing one of 2 sides, or opting to abandon both, with Birthright being the first choice as Korin fights by his Hoshidan family, the eldest of which, Ryoma, leads the charge against Nor and is a samurai to his core, as well as a crustacean if his armor is anything to go off. I firmly believe His Highness would pick Pokemon that align with his Bushido code, thus Hisui and Samurott, Ninjask, Heracross, Annihilate, and Chien-Pao would be his choices along with King Gambit as his ace. The eldest sister of the Hoshidans, Hinoka, boasts a courageous aura not many compare to, and is incredibly humble despite her position of power, making her one of the most likable and intriguing residents of Hoshido, if only the game gave half a shit about her existence. Since she's a Peg Knight, flying types are going to be her forte, though I suspect those which happen to be very fierce, such as Yanmega, Aerodactyl, Crobat, Skarmory, and Glysaur would fit her mold, along with her ace Talonflame, cause man, for a time was that bud a monster in the competitive scene.
Tactical nuke incoming!
The second brother of the Hoshidans, Takumi, certainly has a chip or 2 on his shoulders, for he was a prick to Korin starting out, and in another timeline, his bitterness ultimately consumed him and transformed him into a mere husk. God, I can practically taste the butthurt. Thankfully, he's all good if Korin chooses blood over bonds, and given that he wields a sacred bow, I think Pokemon that possess the ability Sniper would mesh well with Takumi's plan of attack, specifically Octillery, Kingdra, Ariados, Fearow, Drapion, and his ace Inteleon would ensure that no Norian survives an encounter. The youngest and therefore baby of the group, Sakura, is just as sweet and soft as the cherry blossom she's named after, and rather interesting in the fact that despite being enemies, both herself and the Norian princess share many similarities, and I predict they'll more than likely have Pokemon that just so happen to mirror match the other, those being Plusle, Clefable, Gorbis, Volbeat, Beautifly, and her ace Espeon. So you can probably put together what Pokemon Elise will have, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The final slot shall go to one of the 3 ninjas, Kaze, who just so happens to be the neutral party as he'll follow Korin no matter the allegiance, and ironically, dies in Birthright were the 2 of them not to have an ace support by Chapter 15. Something the game never tells you about. Fuckers. Given Kaze's ties to ninjutsu, Pokemon who embody the various elements of said craft, I can easily perceive to become top picks for his party, with the candidates being Ninjask, Aselgor, Crobat, Zoroark, Starmie, and his ace Ash Greninja. Low-hanging fruit for sure, but hey,
It just works.
choosing the second option has Korin ally himself with Nor, a much harder route and to my knowledge, the first time in the series we get to play as the quote-unquote bad guys for the majority of the campaign, and boy, did it show in the writing department. though it still pertains a better script than the other choices. Yeah, I said it! Leading the charge against Hoshido is the Crown Prince Xander, the eldest, strongest, and wisest of the family, and a paragon of strength who would ride into battle alongside a barrage of Pokemon that happen to be noble steeds, consisting of Mudsdale, Rapidash, Zebstrika, Keldeo, Glastier, and his ace, Spectrier. Xander might be the leader of the pack, but the eldest sister Camilla acts as the emotional center and mommy of the group in more ways than one. She stood out from the rest of the cast for a multitude of reasons, one of which was her class line and the subsequent introduction of the BlazingKnight, women riders who could manifest magic, and so I believe Camilla would adore having dragon-type Pokemon, some of which have mystical affinity. In particular Hydreigon, Dragapult, Dragalge, Tyrantrum, and Hisuian Gudra, I believe, to make the ideal partners, plus her ace Mega Charizard X, because these two get milked so hard by their respective dares they're practically made for each other. While the eldest siblings have many qualities that make them rather illustrious, Prince Leo is no slouch, for his wisdom and tactical rationale are insurmountable, plus his proficiency at wielding Brunhilde makes him a force to be reckoned with. Therefore, I conclude that Pokemon of a dark thematic, and those which are tied to nature, would complement his prowess most wonderfully. Thus the likes of Serperior, Ferrothorn, Meowscarada, Brambleghast, and Trevenant would be ideal, plus Grimmsnarl as its ace, especially in its Gigantamax form, as it would quickly put the Faceless out of a job. Nor might be in a dire state, but that doesn't stop the Cinnamon Roll Elise from being the wholesome beacon of hope for the future. And as you may recall, herself and Sakura share a team of mirror-matched Pokemon, only I motion that Elise would preferably use the darker equivalents given her surroundings, consisting of Minun, Wigglytuff, Huntail, Illumise, Dustox, and her ace, Umbreon. The final Norian to wrap up this segment is another neutral unit, Silas, who will follow Corin to the ends of the earth despite said dragon not initially remembering all Silas did for them growing up. Either that's true dedication or an unhealthy fixation, you lot can decide. Silas is a very well-rounded soldier on all fronts, so I envision normal type Pokemon to suit him well, but his nationality would allow for dark types to be additionally appropriate, and so Alolan Raticate, Mightyena, Stoutland, Swallow, and Dubwool would be for the best, with Obstagoon as his ace Pokemon. Alas, we have reached the final path of Fire Emblem Fates, Revelations, where Corin refuses to choose a side and travels to the mysterious land of Vala to defeat the true evil behind it all and unite both nations. A tale new players can't experience because Nintendo said fuck you and the eShop. The titular character Corin is at the center of every fable and goes through varying arcs and stages of character evolution, though we use that term very loosely, signified by their personal weapon the Yato, transforming into new versions depending on the context. And so Pokemon who have a similar transformation gimmick I perceive to flow nicely with the ocean's grey waves. So Porygon, Tyrogue, Corellia, Eevee, Type Null, and their ace Zygarde shall be the ideal choices. Accompanying Corin on their journey is the dancer Azora, who hails from Vala and depending on one's perspective, is one of the most complex, well-written and otherwise best characters in the game, or an exposition bot and constant deus ex machina to the point where it literally kills her.
Why won't you let me die?
Her talent for music and dancing makes it reasonable to assume that just like her mother, she would partner up with Pokemon who are concurrently charming, those being Primarina, Oricorio, Bellossom, Chatot, Altaria, and her ace Meloetta, though I doubt Garen will approve of her choices. Before leaving the walls of the castle, the maids Flora and Felicia plus the butler Jacob attend to Corin's every need and would serve them no matter the path, the exception to this being Birthright, because Flora would rather die than be subjected to that tedium. Since their duties involve hospitalities, I believe these assistants would function as a triple battle team, using the first 3 evolutions and having a Rotom of their own as each ace, specifically Rotom Heat, Wash, and Mow. Another neutral party was the Wind Tribe led by Fuga, a martial artist who until recently, I didn't realize had fucking insane bases! Forget the Royals, this guy could defeat a Nankos blindfolded! Doubly so now that he's got a party of Pokemon to aid him in battle, all of which I conclude to specialize in martial arts, and so Hitmontop, Sork, Mienshao, Hariyama, and Holucha will suit him nicely, with Urshifu as his ace Pokemon, and once it Gigantamaxes, it's game over for this fallen dragon. To end our overview of Fates, we shall have the veteran Gunter see us off, who aided Corin in the beginning, but depending on one's choices, either never comes back, joins during the mid-game, or turns traitor for reasons I'm still trying to piece together. Gunter is an old dog for sure, and given his ties to Nor, I believe that ghost Pokemon or those that are rather ancient would complement his position in life, those being Golurk, Cofagrigus, Jellicent, Alola Marowak, Aegislash, and his ace, Houndstone. He really is an old dog. Now it's time to switch things up and head on over to the Nintendo Switch with Fire Emblem Three Houses. And oh boy, this is where things get messy. So originally the plan was just to cover Byleth, the Three Lords, and Rhea. And even though the teams wouldn't exactly be one-to-one, I already addressed the latter four in the previous video, so it would feel highly redundant.
Can you say redundant?
Therefore, the next logical step was to do 5 characters from each house. But that ultimately felt odd since disregarding the remaining 3 or so occupants would feel like a complete cop-out. So in the end I said, fuck it, let's just cover all of them. Let us begin with the Adrestrian Empire, as Her Highness Lady Edelgard leads the Black Eagles to liberate Fodland and is imperative to every route so as to change the course of history drastically. Given how severely the odds are stacked against her, I hypothesize that Edelgard would strive to usher Pokemon that emulate the same intrepid determination she does, in particular Entei, Excadrill, Roaring Moon, Braviary, Metagross, and her ace, Ho-Oh. And for those wondering why not Yveltal, well, she already had it in the villains video, and since Ho-Oh is a heroic and inspiring creature, I perceive its inclusion to be more contextually appropriate. Her Highness's vassal Hubert will do anything to ensure that Edelgard's goals come to fruition, and God knows he's happy to exercise any unsavory methods in doing so. And I believe that Dark and Poison type Pokemon are what he would determine to be the perfect tools of warfare, with his choices being Seviper, Gengar, Toxtricity, Houndoom, Drapion, and his ace, Salazzle, because the ability to poison literally everything is music to his ears. The only member of the Eagles who feels equal to or superior to Edelgard is Ferdinand von Eyre, a pompous but well-meaning young lad who holds the nobility in the highest regard and strives to emulate its core values to a T, and so he'd undoubtedly train Pokemon with an appropriately noble aura about them, those being Furfuru, Aegislash, Sirfetch'd, Jellicent, Serperior, and his ace, Rapidash. I'd make a joke about Rapidash being a shit Pokemon, but I could easily picture Ferdinand riding one into battle, and it looked pretty cool. While the Empire is brimming with nobles, the lovely Lady Dorothea was born a commoner, but became a star of the Middle Frank Opera, whose looks, voice, and dancing are sublime, and so I envision equally charming pocket monsters to complement her presence, and thus Serena, Meloetta, Ludicolo, Rillaboom, and Primarina would make up her cast and crew, with Roserade being her ace, as both herself and this bouquet are stronger than they look, for all roses have thorns. While the students of Garrick Mark must work extremely hard during the semester, Linhardt, despite his exceptional talent, selectively applies himself only to which he deems interesting. While using the rest of his energy to sleep for so long, you swear he'd been subjected to playing the endgame of Tales of Arise. And so Pokemon who prefer to take naps, I suspect to be a cushiony fit for him, the likes of which consist of Abra, Hypno, Komala, Mashorana, Slacking, and his ace, Snorlax. Of course, the polar opposite to Linhardt comes in the form of Caspar von Bergles, a little fella who dedicates his life to becoming as strong as possible, despite his lack of crest, height, brain cells, and the ability to read the room, because he's oblivious to all of Hilda's advances even at their most blatant.
Hey Hilda, what's up? You should probably put a jacket on.
Shut up and let me be naked!
These shortcomings won't stop him from doing his best, and I can easily picture him gravitating towards fighting-type Pokemon, preferably those of a shorter stature like Poliwrath, Hawlucha, Marshadow, Scrafty, Pawmot, and his ace, Primeape. Garrick Mark makes for a wonderful place to socialize and bond with other faculty members. However, Bernie wouldn't be caught dead outside of her room unless someone literally died. Doubly so now that she can spend her days with her Pokepals, the likes of which I foresee to be connected to scary plants and dolls. Thus Mimikyu, Bayonet, Cacturn, Victorybell, and Cradilly will occupy her team slots, plus Meraxis as her ace, so Ingrid may want to think twice before kicking her door down. Not all the members of the Eagles were native to Adrestria, for Petra is the Princess of Brigid and being held as a hostage, though her classmates treat her as a friend and equal. Growing up in the land of Brigid molded Petra into a resourceful and powerful woman, and so Pokemon who could aid her hunting prowess I think shall bring her great joy, for the likes of Cypher, Tentacruel, Galvantula, Mightyena and Noivern would be very useful, along with Kabutops as her ace, because those vegetables aren't going to cut themselves. While not a student at Garrick Mark, Jeritza acted as both a teacher and Her Highness's greatest weapon, the Death Knight, one of the most powerful and scariest warriors in Fodland, though deep down, Jeritza is a sweet young man, and so a balance of scary yet sweet Pokemon would cover both sides of his personality, those being Morpeko, Corviknight, Dusknoir, Absol, Frostlass and his ace, Houndoom and his Megaform. Sure, Houndoom isn't cute on the surface, but don't forget that Houndoom is a doggo, and according to Octopath Traveler, all doggos are good doggos. You are correct. Trekking north into the Kingdom of Fargus puts us on the path of Azure Moon, with the leader of the Blue Lions, Prince Dimitri, having a bit of a quarter-life crisis no matter the outcome. But thanks to Byleth and the others, he conquers his demons and becomes a true king. Like his stepsister, the Boar Prince is a renowned leader and boasts gargantuan power, to the point where I assume Pokemon of a similar stature would best fit his highness, those being Suicune, Tyrantrum, Gallade, Gyarados, Arcanine and his ace Solgaleo, for in this timeline he is worthy of the Great Lion's power. The tragedy of Duska is a horrible event in the history of Fodland, with Dimitri's vassal Dedue being one of the survivors who serves his highness with the utmost loyalty, and keeps his culture alive through his cooking, act of worship, and work in the greenhouse. The result of his personal interest and battle prowess leads me to believe he would lean towards a team of bulky grass-type Pokemon, those being Ferrothorn, Tangrowth, Rillaboom, Executor, Torterra, and his ace, Chestnut. After all, it's based on the Night class, and God knows Dedue fits that archetype to a T. One of His Highness's oldest friends, Felix isn't particularly happy about Fargus' approach to chivalry and knighthood after the death of his brother, as well as being one of the few who knows just how twisted His Highness's true nature is, leading him to become rather testy and lives by the way of the sword. Is this Fire Emblem or an episode of Bleach? Of course, I picture Felix selecting Pokemon that concurrently follow a sword-based thematic or have some sort of edge to them, resulting in the likes of Sizzle, Bisharp, Aegislash, Kartana, and Garchomp comprising his team formation, with Ceruledge being his ace because you could practically taste the angst. Felix wasn't the only one impacted by Glenn's death, for the betrothed Ingrid was just as devastated by his passing, yet it only strengthened her resolve to become a knight and follow her dreams, even if that meant clashing with her parents' desires or the need to apply makeup, which Mercedes and Dorothea see as a cardinal sin. God forbid those two ever run into Nephany. Miss Galatea is an incredibly gallant young woman, and so Pokemon who emanate such vigor, I garner would never leave her side. Therefore Staraptor, Komomo, Pyroar, Gardevoir or Gallade, doesn't matter which, and Galarian Rapidash will be her trusted allies, with Cobalion acting as her ace and extension of her knightly oath. Fargus has always had strong ties to the Church of Ceros, and one of the goddess's most devout followers is Mercedes von Martritz, the soft emotional centre of the group, whom I'm convinced could solve everyone's problems with a big old hug and a nice cup of tea, or a tasty baked treat, for she's a very talented baker, and so Pokemon who are based around food I pictured to make for the perfect items on her menu. And so Daskbun, Vanillux, Appleton, Poltegeist, and Slurpuff would comprise her team, with Alcremie taking centre stage as her ace. I already pitched a crossover between these two once, it's gonna happen, damn it! Another friend from the prince's younger years, Sylvain of House Gautier, has a rep for being a sleazer and a layabout, and to be fair, he's not exactly trying to convince people otherwise, but anyone who spends time with the man will quickly learn that he's very talented, deep, and charming, which is probably how he describes his penis. Since onlookers are quick to write him off, I believe that Sylvain will play into that and select a team of Pokemon that are unimpressive on the surface but pack lots of power behind that facade, those being Venomoth, Dugtrio, Quagsire, Gastrodon, Klefki, and his ace, Breloom. The best friend of Mercedes and bookworm of the faculty, Little Annette gives everything 110% and packs a power and determination that is unrivaled, with a devastating hero's relic to boot. I see she went to the Amy Rose School of Fighting. Thank God that's the only habit she picked up.
Gotcha, my darling Sonic.
Amy, what are you doing here?
Sonic, this time there's no way out of marrying me.
She wants to physically assault Sonic just so he can marry her?
A team of Pokemon I feel to gel with a net would be those that are just as small but powerful as Miss Dominique herself. In this case, Emolga, Manaphy, and Eevee form, doesn't matter which, Lantern, Jumpluff, and her ace Tinkaton. Because Hammer! While most of the kingdom's men are carrying quite the chip on those broad shoulders, Ash is renowned for being such a good boy, never losing that innocence and hopeful optimism which makes him rather popular with the ladies. Though given his past, the idea of Catherine getting it on with Ash is, well...
So hey, just gonna throw this out there, you're really cute.
Well, you know, my mom always said I was a cute kid.
Oh, a mama's boy, huh? I'll be your mommy.
Awkward. Ash always goes out of his way to help others, and so I'd argue that he's very likely to choose Pokemon that are known for their ability to provide aid. And so the likes of Boltund, Chansey, Go-Goat, Rotom, Shuckle, and his ace Audino would be the top picks. While not a member of the student body, Annette's dad Gilbert has served the kingdom for years and has amassed the legacy of being one of the most loyal and exceptional knights in Fodland, but he sure as shit isn't winning Father of the Year anytime soon. Given his stubborn attitude and lengthy experience as a knight, it stands to reason that Pokemon who primarily function as shields, or those that are quite old, shall partner with this fossil, with the choices being Aegislash, Aggron, Steelix, Sirfetch'd, Duraludon, and his ace, Bastiodon. Heading east into Alliance territory, we have the Golden Deer House led by Claude von Regen, a cunning and devious man who is a master tactician and silver-tongued diplomat. Since Claude is more of an opportunist compared to his peers, charm is key to much of his success in life. And so Pokemon that perpetuate just as much allure, I perceive to make for the perfect pawns in this game of chess, specifically Raikou, Cinderace, Flygon, Sceptile, Ampharos, and his ace, Xerneas. 'Cause it's a deer! Claude doesn't really have any real retainers, but the closest to filling that role is Hilda of House Goneril, who may appear shallow on the surface, not to mention being such a lazy, almost spoilt little princess, but she's one of the most emotionally resonant and caring women in the continent, and has such fun vibes that'll brighten anyone's day, and given her bubbly attitude, I don't think it's a stretch to assume that Hilda would pick a team of Pokemon who just so happen to be pink. Works for Whitney, resulting in Blissey, Lurantis, Miltank, Slowbro, and Tinkaton being her BFFs, plus Sylveon as her ace. Claude may spearhead the alliance, however Lorenz Hellman Gloucester refuses to submit to his standing until the time skip, because if you thought Ferdinand was pompous, this aristocrat has his head so far up his arse and looks like a foot, I'm surprised Dorothea didn't shoot him out of principle. Just like Mr. Von Eyre, Lorenz holds the nobility in the highest esteem, and would justly select Pokemon that reflect synonymously noble traits and values, consisting of Poltegeist, Empoleon, Serperior, Politoed, Aromatisse, and his ace, Lilligant. On the lower end of the financial food chain, Leone is a commoner with a notably rustic demeanour given her roots, not to mention having the benefit of being trained by Captain Geralt and now desires to be the one to call him Daddy.
Giggity giggity.
Leone's circumstances lead me to believe that her choice of Pokemon would likely come down to those which can be found in rural settings, specifically Seaking, Go-Goat, Gramble, Oinkologne, Luxray, and her ace, Mudsdale. Another commoner who came to the academy to build a better life is Raphael, a big teddy bear of a man whose heart is as big as his muscles, but sadly that didn't leave much room for brain power, and it doesn't help that he chooses to spend his time feeding his stomach as opposed to his mind. I'm pretty sure Shonen Jump own the rights to him. Given his enormous appetite, I believe the Pokemon of his choosing would concurrently gorge on snacks, in this case Snorlax, Licky Licky, Hippowdon, Walrein, Pelipper, and his ace Swalot. I just hope Raphael doesn't confuse any Pokemon for food, or Mercy's gonna have a heart attack. Something notable about Edelgard's appearance are the colour of her eyes and hair, which are the result of having been implanted with two crests, with Miss Cordelia sharing the same fate and leaving her with a warped appearance and a life expectancy of lasting no longer than 5 years, though whether that's due to the crest or the amount of sugar in her diet is for you to decide. Though her time is limited, Lysithea quickly cemented herself as a gifted mage and an incredibly capable student. Thus, I believe powerful psychic Pokemon would best reflect her station, those being Alakazam, Espeon, Sigilyph, Metagross, Farigiraf, and her ace, Reuniclus. Not everyone who attends Garrick Mark does so out of their own fruition, for Ignatz is obligated to become a knight despite his dreams of being an artist, and God knows he's got the skills to back it up. Without question, I foresee Aiken has to seek out Pokemon who could perpetuate his passion, and though a very niche selection, the likes of Grafaiai, Ditto, Pavilion, Bronzong, Malamar, and his ace Smeargle would help make his dream a reality. Our final Golden Deer student is none other than Marianne von Edmund, a young lady who's been through a lot in life and doesn't see much of any value in herself despite being beautiful in every sense of the word, making it hard for her to connect with people, but she's got no problem talking to the local wildlife. So well in fact that the idea of Marianne having Pokemon is highly plausible, and I'm led to believe she'll likely become attached to creatures who have a connection to Mother Nature herself. Thus Flordrus, Sawsbuck, Arboliva, Comfey, and Tropius would seek solace in this maiden, with Galarian Rapidash being her ace. We're not quite done with the alliance yet, as Judith of House Daphnel is an instrumental leader within her territory and was convicted of the heinous crime of not being playable in Free Houses or Free Hopes. I haven't seen this much injustice since Nintendo's lack of DLC for Mario Party Superstars. Do it! While she may not be the top dog within the alliance, her support in their war against the Empire cannot be dismissed, and given her reputation, I believe Pokemon of a pseudo-legendary standing would be most pleasing. Thus Tyranitar, Garchomp, Hisuian Goodra, Dragonite, and Dragapult will comprise her garrison, with Carmelo as her ace. Each nation's leader can only come out on top, with the progenitor god Byleth by their side, the child of Captain Gerald and professor at Garrick Mark despite having no qualifications, for they got the position due to personal bias from the one in charge, getting a little contemporary I see. Despite their lack of experience, Byleth demonstrates a knack for education and is paramount in the entire student body's growth and development. Therefore, Pokemon who similarly play the role of teacher would please the goddess living rent-free in Byleth's head. Therefore, Lucario, Lapras, Metagross, Uxie, and Oranguru would get the thumbs up from Sophis, plus Arceus as their ace because duh! At the heart and centre of Fodlan lies Garrick Mark Monastery, with the Archbishop Rhea being at the epicenter of this religious community, helping to guide Fodlan for years, from defeating Nemesis to implementing many of the societal foundations that have led to the current state of classism and genetic superiority.
Oops.
While far from perfect, Rhea has done much good for Fodland, and at her best is a divine and soft saint whose Pokemon are pictured to be soft dragon types, and or those of a similarly tranquil nature. And so Goodra, Altaria, Mega Ampharos, Dragonite, and Aurorus will be her own congregation, with Reshiram as her ace, as she'll essentially be looking in a mirror. Rhea certainly can't lead Fodlan by herself, otherwise the continent would have collapsed within 5 minutes, which is where Sephiroth steps in to aid the Archbishop and guide the students of Fodlan at large, thanks to his wisdom and experience. And so Pokemon who perpetuate the same insight would be the most optimal choices for his companions, and I feel the likes of Alakazam, Oranguru, Drampa, Honchkrow, and Slowking would suit him well, plus Zekrom as his ace to complement Rhea in a very metaphorical sense. Rhea and Sephiroth are a special breed of being, and not many of their kind exist anymore, with the youngest of their race, Flame, being Sephiroth's only child, and led a very sheltered life for her own protection, even if dear old daddy went a bit overboard in places. Flame has always been full of life, love, and has an affinity for the ocean, not to mention an appetite for the creatures that dwell within, and thus I propose that fish shall be the theme for Flame's team provided she doesn't eat them. Therefore Vaporeon, Luminion, Wishiwashi, Fidizen, and Sharpedo shall stay by her side forever, with Kingdra as her ace since it's part dragon type, which is a nice callback to her bloodline. While Rhea is perfectly capable of defending herself, Thunder Catherine ensures that no harm shall befall the Archbishop, and brandishes her hero's relic with such finesse she could be mistaken for a Jedi. Due to her title and weapon of choice, I believe it reasonable to assume that she would select electric Pokemon as the foundations of her team composition, and thus Electivire, Luxray, Toxtricity, Electros, and Manectric will act as her private squadron, with Zeraora taking on the role of her ace. Catherine's partner in crime, Shamir, while not loyal to the church, is one of their finest soldiers and ensures that no matter the target, the moment she gets them in her sights, they'll drop dead faster than Microsoft lays off employees.
Ouch.
Similar to Takumi, Pokemon with the ability Sniper, I deliberate to suit her preferences, as well as bug types as an extension of her training. Therefore, Drapion, Vero, Ariados, Yanmega, and Vikavolt would be her team picks, along with Mega Beedrill as her ace. Before Byleth earned their position of teacher, there were 2 professors already working at Garrick Mark, the first being the songstress Manuela, who has so many accolades to her name, you wouldn't have guessed that she's marred down with a drinking problem and troubled love life. Makes you really question Garrett Mark's hiring policies. Due to her history as a diva, I feel she's liable to gathering a team of Pokemon who are just as skilled at the performing arts, and thus Toxtricity, Kricketune, Ludicolo, Roserade and Oricorio will share the stage with the songstress, plus Blossom as her ace, as she'll need that sleep powder after a night of tequila shots. Acting as the proverbial oil to Manuela's water, Professor Hanneman is an exuberant magician whose affinity for Crestology makes Hisama's pickle obsession seem quaint. Hanneman has significant experience and wisdom to impart, and in the context of team composition, I suggest psychic types and those who are equally insightful to be most proper. In this case Gothitelle, Xatu, Galarian Slowking, Claydol, and Mr. Rhyme are most exquisite, with Alakazam being his ace. I mean, he's old enough to have played Gen 1, so figures it would be his favourite. Protecting Garrett Mark is serious business, but that doesn't stop Alois from trying and failing to lighten the mood with an assortment of jokes so awful, I'm surprised Shamir hasn't shot him already. Given his outlook on life, it's not a stretch to assume that his choice of Pokemon are ones he could use as a setup for bad puns and jokes galore. After all, my dear Shamir, it's not far-fetched to assume that my gags will leave you coughing. Honestly, I take one Pikachu and wonder, why not have a laugh every now and then? You'll have a whalmer of a time. I'm in trouble, aren't I? Our final member of the church is not a teacher, knight, or bishop of any kind. In fact, he isn't even an adult, as Cyril works hard to keep the monastery clean as a way of showing thanks to Rhea for granting him a new life within Garrett Mark, as he'll happily take free labor over whatever the hell happened in Elmira. Cyril, at a glance, doesn't seem like anything special, but the boy has a literal aptitude for learning, and so Pokemon who seem rather plain and or bland, but have garishly strong evolved forms, I forward to be well suited to this young squire, those being Magikarp, Phoebus, Sneasel, Shroomish, Wimpod, and his ace, Eevee, which can take whichever form you personally see fit. We're not done with Fodlan just yet, as lurking beneath Garrett Mark is the Abyss, and within it, the House of the Ashen Wolves, led by Yuri, who's got his fingers in all sorts of underhanded practices, and given his dashing appearance, he could get his fingers into just about anybody. His personality and class alignment is that of a trickster, and so Pokemon who are just as sly, I imagine would make his job a lot easier. Thus Zoroark, Grimmsnarl, Meowstic, Gengar, and Honchkrow are certain to be in his good books, plus Mega Sableye acting as his ace. The Abyss is a place for folks who have lost everything, and oh man did Miss Novelle's life take a turn for the worse during the Empire's war with Bridget and Dagda, resulting in her entire family being wiped out and Constance suffering a bad case of PTSD every time she sees the sun. Bernie could certainly relate. This hasn't stopped Constance's efforts to rebuild House Nouvelle, and I believe the help of Pokemon who emanate either day or night will make doing so little more than a household chore, thus choosing Espeon, Umbreon, Roserade, Frostmoth, and Weavile would be most gracious, with Archeops as her ace since just like its trainer, it's prone to giving up when things start to heat up. Many scoundrels exist within the Abyss, and Balthus is more than happy to demonstrate why he's the king of grappling. Too bad he can't grapple with the idea of a savings account, and then again in this economy not many of us can. Balthus is all about having a good brawl, and so Pokemon who are just as trigger happy with their fists, I presume to make for endless sources of entertainment for this rascal. And so Hitmonchan, Crabrawler, Grappalot, Pangoro, and Kommo will make up his team, with Machamp being his ace because the more hands on deck the better. While the Abyss isn't the most ideal location to live, some unfortunate residents are forced to subside within its dwellings for the safety of others, as is the case with Happy, for even a slight sigh could cause all manner of monsters to emerge and wreak havoc. Give it time and she'll eventually call forth Godzilla. Since these tyrants can't seem to get enough of this meat bag, a team of Pokemon that resemble the various monsters throughout three houses, I feel would make for a highly incorrigible team. Thus Corviknight, Lycanroc, Sandaconda, Drodogon and Noivern would act as the ideal substitutes, while her ace Absol could warn Happy of the impending danger, which I'm sure she's otherwise used to. Last but not least, we have an entity who didn't exist within the Three Houses timeline, but in another universe, the mercenary Shares acted as counterpart to Byleth, being a vessel for the progenitor god Arvel and a product of the Agarthians minus the lack of vitamin D. Shez is such a laid-back and cool individual, it's easy to see why the students grew so attached to this cell sword, so Pokemon who also have a significant cool factor to them, preferably dark types, I conceive to make for an excellent team of fighters, in particular Weavile, Bisharp, Tyranitar, Greninja, Crocodile, and their ace, Giratina. After that endurance round, we finally made it to the latest entry in the Fire Emblem series, Engage, which is notable for celebrating 30 years of the franchise's history through the various rings the cast utilize to summon heroes from the series past to create a bright future for the land of Ilios. Since the emblem rings are sacred treasures, many of them are instrumental to the various kingdoms, and wielded by those in power, whom I observed to just so happen to come in pairs, and so I'll be gifting two characters a single team of Pokemon as if they were to partake in a double battle. Let us first observe Aaliyah and Vale, the former being the protagonist, while the latter makes for the game's only worthwhile villain who eventually comes to her senses and fights alongside her sibling. Given that they're both dragons, with Aaliyah being the divine one and Vale forced to be evil, I believe it stands to reason that Pokemon of a deity-like nature that act as symbolic pairings would fit very nicely into these two's team composition, and so they would likely have Koraidon and Miraidon, Latias and Lotias, and finally Mew and Mewtwo as their aces. Playing host to the emblems of the Caring Princess and Dawn Maiden, Firene fosters the Prince and Princess Alfred and Selim respectively, both of which are very charming and sweet young nobles who, despite their assumed naivete, shoulder heavy burdens and help to keep each other going in the darkest of times. Since their homeland is a serene paradise, my gut's telling me that Pokemon with substantial ties to nature, and those who have a bit of a slow start before becoming powerhouses, would be splendiferous, and so Leafeon and Whimsicott, Breloom and Florges, and their respective aces Regigigas and Celebi would do these two a world of good. The land of Brodia pertains the Ring of the Young Lion, with the Brodia brothers being responsible to keep the peace while not forgetting to demonstrate why they are not to be trifled with, something Diamant has no trouble demonstrating, while his brother Alchrist could use a bit of a spine adjustment.
In a figurative or literal sense?
Yes. While these two might be polar opposites, the love they share is so genuine, and their differences manifest our harmonious relationship. Therefore, I put forth the notion that Pokemon which emulate similar balancing acts would construct an excellent team. Thus, there's Gyarados and Milotic, Glalie and Frostlass, and their aces Yveltal and Xerneas. The nation of Elusia went to war with Brodia many times, with the Ring of the Lady of the Plains being their trump card, with the sisters Ivy and Hortensia having been put through the ringer throughout this tale and make for some of the game's best drama and character growth, especially in Chapter 14. Which would have been all the more apparent had Zephyr done everyone a favor and fucked off.
Since you summoned me, you must take good care of me.
The day I snap, you're the first to go.
The general vibe I get from these two is that of light and dark, given their personalities. Therefore, I welcome Pokemon who represent similar symbolism, those being Solrock and Lunatone, Espeon and Umbreon, and their aces Darkrai and Cresselia. The last set of siblings hail from the land of Solm, and host the rings of the Radiant Hero and Crux of Fate, taking the form of Temera and Fogado, a pair that yield a far more casual approach to life and seem to have gone to the Claude school of communication given their way with words, even if Temera looks more like a gym leader than a Fire Emblem character. But in this context, it's very appropriate. Since Solm is covered in sand and seas, a pairing of ground and water type Pokemon I find to be most applicable, and so their team shall be Kingler and Flygon, Glysaur and Gastrodon, with their aces being none other than Groudon and Kyogre. Insert joke about too much water here. And now we've reached the final game in this extensive excursion, Fire Emblem Heroes. And just a quick heads up, I'm only going as far as Book 5. Since being real with all of you, I stopped playing halfway through Book 7. And until I get something Sumia related, or a really good Dorothea alt emerges, I am not coming back. Not even a new Azora form, Resplendent Black Knight or Camilla was enough to sway me, which is odd considering the effect she's had on me in the past.
I'll play with you.
The heroes of Fire Emblem, well, heroes vary from each fable, but at their centre lies Alphonse and Sharina, siblings who work together to keep the peace and seem to have grown significantly since the game's launch. Or at least Alphonse has, last time I checked Sharina's still getting shafted. The two of them function as the sword and shield of Asuka, and so Pokemon who are often paired together for offense and defense, I believe shall gel seamlessly with these warriors. Thus Rampardos and Bastiodon, Nidoking and Nidoqueen, and their aces Zacian and Zamazenta will ensure that not even death can stand in their way. The first of many obstacles that clashed with the nobles of Asuka was Princess Veronica, A very odd case of back and forth regarding her role of antagonist, but has since come full circle and now aids the siblings in their quest for peace. Quite the juxtaposition from her yesteryears, but after all that kerfuffle with Embla, she made the right choice. Veronica has always been a powerful sorceress, and so a mix of psychic and dark type Pokemon would be the type of creatures I perceive her to have the greatest attachment to, those being Hooper Unbound, Honchkrow, Morpeko, Reuniclus, Delphox, and her ace, Lunala. Book 2 saw the introduction of the realm of Nephil, and with it, the Princess Fjorm. Easily Hero's best original character, and that was before the Tempest Trials, with a small but nonetheless impactful story and character arc, wonderful rivalry with Legion, and her own special music video because gosh darn it, Ice Women just hit differently. Speaking of ice, that's pretty much her forte, and so I assume ice-type Pokemon shall suit her preferences, consisting of Glaceon, Alola Ninetales, Frostlass, Aurorus, Lapras, and her ace, Kyurem, which can become either Kyurem Black or White, depending on what form Fjorm happens to take. The third chapter in Hero's saga took a very dark turn as Death herself joined the fray, while the Princess Heir defied her mother and sought her destruction, and at the end of her struggles, the truth was revealed and it turns out she was the Princess of Light all along. I'd make an ugly duckling comparison, but at no point can this woman be considered ugly. Since she's privy to both life and death, I find it fair to adopt the notion that her choice of Pokemon would be a mix of both light and darkness, and so Grimmsnarl, Houndoom, Cherrim, Florges, and Chansey will constitute the bulk of her team, while Yveltal acts as her ace. Finally, we're jumping all the way to Book 5 because I still have no clue what happened in Book 4, and frankly I don't think the devs do either, as we head for the realm of Neovila to meet the Princess Regan, sister to the villains Ota and Fafnir, who's unique for riding mechanical armor/automatons into battle, which I'm sure the Agarthans took note of. This makes her choice of Pokemon fit a very niche demographic, those being monsters that are capable of being ridden or steel types given her mechanical aesthetic, choosing to select Revavroom, Basculegion, Iron Treads, Wordia, and Hisuian Braviary as her teammates, with either Koraidon or Miraidon as her ace depending on your preference. Whew! Well, we've finally made it to the end of this colossal video, but for those of you who have stuck around, thank you all ever so much. I hope that you had a great time. Please let me know what you thought in the comments, and what teams of Pokemon would you personally assign to the various Fire Emblem heroes, including ones that weren't featured in this video. Additionally, would y'all be down for more videos like this, only I tackle various other franchises such as Xenoblade Chronicles or Castlevania? Once again, huge thank you to FunLabs Entertainment for sponsoring today's video, and I would like to say an enormous thank you to all my patrons who help support this channel, make these videos possible, and just help out, especially with all the fluctuating stuff going on at YouTube. God, you guys are the absolute best, and I'm so happy and delighted with all the stuff that goes on within our servers and community, and I really appreciate all your support. As you can see, I've been focusing more so on longer videos, for those with more animations and stuff like that, a bit more ambitious stuff, and as a result, it takes longer, but the results speak for themselves, and this all made possible thanks to each and every one of you for all your support, your love, whether it be through the Twitch streams, just general feedback, and just, this, that, and the other, the daily stuff. You guys are the absolute best, and I do this all for you, and this is all made possible because of you. So, mwah, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would like to say a very special thank you to Wolffox, Lucina21, K-Dog, Jeremy Redinger, Glentrog750, Chaos Sableye, VC Videos 100, Starship 9, Midnight Castle, Maggieful, Fahrenheit392, Daniel Hodgson, Isaac A. Flores, and Zenny Dragon. Thank you all so much. Mwah! I love you. I absolutely love you. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.